Today, India and China eliminate more girls than the number of girls born in America every year.
Genocide is the deliberate, systematic destruction of an ethnic or religious group. Gendercide is the deliberate, systematic destruction of a gender group, usually girls.
மனசில் அது வச்சிருக்கக்கூடாது. பையனாக இருந்தால் வச்சுக்கலாம், பெண்ணாக இருந்தால் ஒழிச்சு பண்ணலாம். அப்படி இப்படி பிடிச்சா தேர்ந்து போச்சு. பிறந்த உடனே நானே பாசிபிள் மறுபடி பையனே இல்லை அப்படின்னு 8 குழந்தைங்களாட்டெல்லாம் கொண்டு விட்டோம்.
So in India, China, and other parts of the world today, girls are killed, aborted, and abandoned simply because they're girls. This female genocide, what many are calling gendercide, has resulted in the elimination of as many as 200 million women from the world's population. It's hard to fathom such a statistic. Just to put it in perspective, more girls have been killed in the last 50 years because they're girls than all of the wars of the 20th century, World War I, World War II, all the major battles of the 20th century combined. More girls have been eliminated through gendercide in the past decade than all of the major genocidal events of the 20th century combined. It's hard to wrap your mind around it. But making this film has led to more questions than answers for me. This was my first feature-length documentary film experience. I'd spent the last nearly 2 decades traveling the world and capturing stories of human need for humanitarian aid and development, nonprofits and NGOs, and just kind of helping them mobilize support for their work. And over these years, I'd seen a lot of injustice, but nothing quite prepared me for standing at the edge of a field in southern India and looking at a row of graves and listening to this mother share how she personally strangled 8 of her own newborn daughters in her quest for a son. This brought a lot of questions into my mind. You know, how can a mother perpetrate such violence on her own daughters? Yeah. And really, how can women in India who suffer such subjugation and devaluation participate in that very same system by killing their own daughters? This was really hard to comprehend for me. But I got a little bit of insight into these questions when later that day that we filmed this Indian woman, she sang a song for us. It was a song about a girl given in marriage at a very young age. It was her story. You see, when she was 15, she was excelling in school and had high hopes for her future when it was decided that she would be given as a second wife to her sister's husband because her sister wasn't able to bear children. So it was to be her purpose in life to bear her husband a son. And it was at that point that I realized that this woman standing before me was really a product of the culture in which she lives. This is a culture driven by centuries-old traditions that say boys are more valuable than girls. This is a culture that selectively aborts millions of girls every year. It's a culture in which the mortality rate of girls under the age of 5 is 75% higher than that of boys. Only 3 out of 4 girls live past puberty. 1 out of 4 girls doesn't make it past puberty. And many of the women who are fortunate enough to survive childhood have no control over their own destiny in many ways. Her father can give her in marriage at practically any age, as young as 6 or 8 years old. Once her guardianship is passed from her father to her husband can rape her, he can beat her, he can sell her, he can kill her without any real fear of consequences. One of the greatest questions that I've grappled with as I've tried to educate and mobilize a movement to end gendercide in India and China through the It's a Girl campaign is how does culture change even begin to happen on this scale, particularly with these deeply ingrained mindsets about the value and roles of women as we see in India. And let me interject here that, you know, my passion and desire as a filmmaker and my goal in making It's a Girl was really to give voice to Indian and Chinese women and activists to advocate for change within their own cultures. And if you see the film, you'll hear their stories, and you're going to hear their pleas and their demands for change. I just hope to do their sacrifice and commitment justice in my advocacy on their behalf. But this is a question that they're asking. How does culture change occur on this level? Anthropologists and other behavioral scientists might define culture as the full range of learned human behavior patterns. And for a large part, culture is a very positive thing. There's many beautiful cultural traditions in India. One of my favorites is how extended families stay together in India. You have 3 and 4 generations living in the same home, with the elderly being cared for by their children. I think it's a really beautiful expression of family culture. We learn a lot from that here in the West. We have our own cultural blind spots here. I particularly think of materialism and the constant quest for more, that can have such a negative impact on the environment, and is unfortunately one of the exports from here in the States that I'm generally embarrassed about when I travel the world. One of our exports I'd prefer we didn't export. But it's really appropriate to confront culture, I think, at times. And we can all learn from each other as members of the world community. And really, we're all a product of the culture in which we live. I was deeply impacted by the unique family culture in which I grew up. For instance, my passion for social justice stems from a lifetime of watching my parents helping people in need. In their case, helping people recover from alcohol and drug addiction and homelessness at great personal sacrifice. I'm up there on the far left with the eye patch. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Wasn't a pirate, but that's my parents below me there. We grew up in what many would probably consider poverty because my parents preferred to volunteer most of their time over working a traditional job. We lived as a family of 6 in small travel trailers throughout most of my childhood, kind of slept on the floor. And I remember throughout high school, our trailer was parked in a trailer park behind the No-Tell Motel on Miracle Mile, which was the notorious red light district of Tucson at that time. But I mean, you couldn't have convinced us we were poor, because this rich life of purpose and helping others, might have come at a cost of material comforts and financial security. But to this day, I wouldn't trade it for wealth, because I know it's such a large part of what formed that culture that formed me into who I am today. And each of us are formed by the experiences we have as children. One of the greatest experiences that impacted who I am today was a knife accident that resulted in the loss of my right eye when I was 9 years old. I now have a prosthetic eye. And this experience was a large part of, in looking back, of course, as an adult, you look back and you see these patterns of, okay, that impacted me on these kinds of levels. And it's a great example of how our fundamental mindsets influence the outcomes in our lives. Because my parents refused to believe that the loss of my eye would be a handicap, as many others considered it. The doctors predicted that I wouldn't really have a normal life like other boys. I couldn't really ride bicycles and do those kinds of activities because of a lack of depth perception. So how did my parents respond to that dire prediction? They bought me a unicycle. And yes, I learned to ride it. Yeah. They refused to accept that the loss of my eye was going to limit me in any way, so I didn't believe my loss of my eye was going to limit me in any way. And I grew up like any other normal kid from my neck of the woods, riding motorcycles and camping and hiking. And to this day, I'm an avid mountain biker and love adventure and wouldn't even consider not trying something simply because I've, am missing an eye. Another real, I think a huge turning point in my life and experience happened when I returned to school with my first newly made prosthetic eye. And I remember the moment it happened. I was standing on the playground surrounded by kids when someone asked, "Hey, can you take it out?" Yeah, you know where this is going, huh? I said, "Sure," and I popped it out. Of course, the girls run screaming and shrieking away, and I might as well have had superpowers as far as the boys were concerned. Suddenly, all the boys are like, "That's gross, I want one," And I mean, it's the first experience, the first lesson I can remember when it comes to being a culture changer, albeit an accidental culture changer, in that I witnessed firsthand how events can influence mindsets and how that can lead to a shift in the communal perspective on something, in this case, a disability. So what had been an environment of mourning and loss, you know, poor Evan and his tragic knife accident, he'll never be the same. I'd become the primary example of kids for the entire county on how not to use a knife. You know, you don't want to be like Evan, do you? Don't end up like Evan, you know. And suddenly what was, for all accounts and purposes, you know, a massive loss in my life, suddenly, hey, there's a silver lining here. And I took it and ran with it, literally and figuratively, after the girls. It wasn't long before I figured out all sorts of fun ways to capitalize on this new talent, you know. Playing hide and seek suddenly became really fun because I could pop it out and look around corners and behind the couch, in the closet, you know. I see you! That really freaked the kids out. That was really fun. And it wasn't long before people stopped asking me things like, hey, Evan, can you keep your eye out for so-and-so? You know? Or Evan, keep your eye on my briefcase while I go to the bathroom. People just stopped doing that kind of thing, wisely. I've mellowed out a little in my older age, so I won't take it out for you. But anyways, so my life was never the same after that. I started just taking life as it came, even to the point of becoming a one-eyed filmmaker. Well, how that works, but it's a whole other story. But suffice it to say, living in a two-dimensional world does help when working in a two-dimensional format like film and television. But anyway, I digress. Back to culture. Many challenge me on my supposition that culture can be bad and need changing. There's a lot of people that would believe that cultural traditions are above moral judgment. For instance, there are indigenous tribal groups in the Amazon basin in South America who bury infants alive when they're born with a disability, or if they're born twins. Their belief is that the tribe will be cursed through this child, and this ritualistic burial wards the tribe from these curses, and the parents are required to carry this out or be banished from the tribe. Now, coming from a culture that considers those with disabilities equally valuable and deserving of every opportunity, my inclination is to consider this murder. But there are tribal advocacy groups who consider these ancient tribal cultures as something that should be protected, and in that context, these practices are above moral judgment. So I would suggest a society that protects and values those with disabilities is morally superior to one that does not. And I think there are many examples of this assertion of alternately abled people who have accomplished incredible things and brought incredible good to the world, like Helen Keller or Joni Eareckson Tada. And people like Jessica Cox, you see in the picture here, overcame significant disability. She was born with no arms to become a pilot. She now travels the world as an advocate and a motivational speaker, and a mentor for alternately abled. And just amazing story. There are a lot of other examples, like Lori Schneider, who we're going to hear from a little bit later, is another example of someone that, you know, overcame significant physical challenges to accomplish amazing things. So I've looked at a number of examples of these massive human rights injustices throughout history. Take, for instance, the transatlantic slave trade, or the apartheid in South Africa, or the Jewish Holocaust. I've noticed some similarities in these. One is that victims are reduced to a non-citizen, almost subhuman status. Another is that the world community turned a blind eye for far too long before getting involved in intervening in these atrocities. Significant intervention by the world community was required in order for them to end. And those that were willing to fight for justice, without those that were willing to fight for justice getting involved, millions more could have potentially been killed or exploited. And there's others like Oskar Schindler. I mean, you hear historical accounts of those who lived in the area of Germany and these nations surrounding, expressing regret that they didn't do more to intervene when the train loads of Jewish people passed by their doorsteps to the concentration camps and worse. And we have stories of people like Oskar Schindler, who is portrayed in the movie Schindler's List, who we celebrate today because of his bravery and courage and sacrifice, personal risk in helping to save people. So the question to me is, which side of history do you and I want to be on when it comes to the account of the final end of gendercide? In India, gendercide in all of its forms is reaching unbearable proportions. You might have heard recent news stories about the horrific gang rape stories coming out of India. Girls as young as 4 and 5 years old raped by multiple men and killed. Has been leading to major demonstrations and unrest there in India, people coming out to the streets. The Indian government has promised reforms, but it's been largely symbolism over substance. And India has a history, unfortunately, of implementing laws to protect women, but failing to enforce them. Sex selection, sex-selective abortion, and dowry have been illegal for decades, yet they're happening in proportions today, unlike any time in history. So many are calling for education and women's empowerment, which has been something that's been very effective in elevating the status of women in many parts of the world. But in India, when you have the highest skewed sex ratios occurring in areas of India with the highest levels of education and the highest income, and when you have a woman president sitting over the last few years, you have many of the higher offices filled by women. You have 1/3 of the seats in local governments filled by women, but yet the plight of women is worse than ever in India. You start to wonder whether women's empowerment and education is really the silver bullet that we've all hoped it could be there. So what's the solution? I believe that it's at times like this that the movement in India is reaching a critical stage. I think it's a stage at which it could falter and lead to potentially decades more of subjugation and murder of millions of girls without the support of the world community. I think that's where it's culture changers like you and I that can support, that can stand behind the culture changers in India and China and give them a megaphone, as it were, for their voice in the world community. The It's a Girl campaign has mobilized almost 500,000 people to support join our cause to end gendercide in India and China so far. But can you imagine if we had tens of millions of voices calling for world leaders to act? I understand that the reality is that culture change is much more complex than this, and we could probably talk all day. But it's a start in restoring dignity and worth to women, girls and women who really desperately need help now. And I would be remiss when it comes to violence against women not to mention the challenges we have in our own nation and other parts of the world. And the fact is, we can all become culture changers starting at home first, and particularly when it comes to violence against women, by honoring and respecting the women in our own lives, by teaching our sons to do the same and teaching our daughters to expect nothing less. And the reality is, thank you. But together we can become culture changers and create a whole new future for the girls of India and China. I hope you'll join me. Thank you.